Thank you for choosing to watch my presentation. The article that I have chosen to translate is called Identifying Phishing Domain Names Using Their Semantic Relatedness. This pertains to background research on my dissertation. I am a graduate student. I'm at candidacy and the computational linguistics department, as well as in SPICE at Luddy in the cybersecurity program. My dissertation focuses on risk perception in Cyrillic cyberspace. So I have chosen this particular article as it contributes to background research and a global body of literature pertaining to risk perception, particularly in across national light. So a lot of background research in this field of study offers insights into universal versus regional aspects of cybersecurity, whether or not risks are perceived or addressed in a based on cultural differences, or if the way that we interact with insecurity on the internet is more of a universal response. So this particular article in French is helpful in the fact that it helps to gauge general cybersecurity understanding in a French context, in a Francophone context. Here are a few lexical items that may not be totally intuitive upon first reading of this article. Phishing a lot of times may be just transliterated or translated literally or accepted as an Anglicism, but I've come across this word in the article for phishing. Phishing is a type of social engineering designed to trick internet users into giving personal information that may be financial in nature, especially. So this is the act of phishing, and this would be the criminal behind the phishing attack, a phisher. DNS is the domain name system. This is a universal system for correlating groups of numbers into surface text that's understandable and a URL address. So typically, when computers function, everything is just numbers. But we have certain protocols in place that convert groups of numbers into language that's more superficially understood by end users. So the domain name system functions in this way so that we as human beings can enter language that we understand, which is then interpreted by a computer, converted to numbers, and processed by a computer. DNS packets refer to this process of relating groups of numbers to text understood in human language. So I will now discuss a few aspects of this translation that I think are noteworthy, as well as aspects that were rather difficult to translate. And in this particular example here is a translation that I'm not totally satisfied with, but I haven't been able to find a decent English term for the French in this, and that may be because I don't know the context of the French verb in order to properly find an English equivalent. So we see here that this translates as this infinitive translates as to offend, Um, but in the English translation, we see that this method is based on the fact that phishers register domain names using a specific vocabulary to trap their victims through offended links. Really, they um, trap their victims through embedded links that are designed to con people, to be a spoof. This doesn't necessarily refer to offense. Offense in English would denote some sort of insult, but the French context must be different here. But I thus far haven't found the best way to translate this. All of the resources still give me to offend, which clearly does not compute necessarily in the proper semantic text context in English. Um, some other differences that were more intuitive, easier to find a translation for. An example here. We have this verb which means literally to exploit. So the literal translation here would be this difference can be exploited by using the proposed metric to identify groups of domain names as malicious or legitimate. Um, exploited in English tends to have, in my view, a negative connotation, but this actually denotes the fact that this is beneficial. So therefore, I didn't keep the literal translation exploit, but rather I changed it to capitalized on to denote that there was a positive aspect to this, a beneficiary to the action, which without the context here, we wouldn't have been able to determine that. So, for example, in a dictionary, exploit this verb here always gave exploits, but through the context, I was able to change the meaning to a totally different verb in English that has nothing to do really with. It has relation to exploiting, but here the key difference is positivity versus negativity, and in this case, we want to denote a positive nature to this sentence, which with just a regular infinitive to exploit is ambiguous. All right. Another phrase worth noting. Literally, this here in red would translate to being of the order of 20 to 30%. In English, again, this sounds strange. So here in this case, I actually had to do some searching in more concise dictionaries, as well as some corpus dictionaries to find additional translations using this phrase. And one that I found that worked perfectly, and I figured it must be the most accurate, would be in the range of so in the range of 20 to 30%. This in English sounds quite reasonable, and certainly much more intuitive and easy to understand than in the being of the order of. So here I have a couple of examples of grammatical expressions and grammatical aspects that we have discussed in class, one of which being the reflexive, which English as a Germanic language doesn't have in the same sense. We do have reflexives in some of the same ways that the Latin languages have, but Latin languages, the Romance languages in general, have this se. to denote reflexivity, which functions quite differently. In English, we use a past participle, whereas reflexiveness can just be added with just a say here. So we have the example here, an infinitive with reflexive say, not reflexive in the sense of doing something to oneself, but reflexive in the sense that it is done. So these are expressions which in English we show using, again, an auxiliary verb and the past participle. Again here, to be applied, in French we have our reflexive clitic plus, but the translation in English goes to a helping verb plus the past participle of a main verb. So these were aspects that we certainly discussed in class that were quite common in this translation. And finally, sorry, this slide. Finally, another aspect is infinitival phrases with prepositions. So really prepositional phrases, preposition plus infinitive. In English, we always use the gerund after prepositions, without seeing, without having, without doing. So she crossed the street without looking. In French and in other languages as well, it's quite different in the fact that they use the infinitive. I decided to include this example in this grammar presentation because I feel that even though in English we have a very different construction, this construction in the Romance languages and in French as well seems very logical, and even though it's completely different and not something that in English is even possible without to have, it seems very logical in French, and it's understandable. It's to me at least, it's sort of automatically translated. You don't really have to think about it. It's just given the context of the sentence, that seems like it must be the English without plus the gerund. So I thought that was worth discussing in this final section. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. I think that maybe this will be a bit of a different type of writing style, a different field than usual, and that, of course, has a lot of benefits in terms of vocabulary as well as scientific and research style. So in all, I think this was a really good read, and I actually do plan on referencing parts of this in the related works of my dissertation. Thanks for watching. I hope everyone has a successful end to the summer semester and success in their academic careers as well.